Welcome back, Heat Seekers. It is the Week 5 running back tiers. We're going to do our best to give you some quality plays, maybe some guys you need to steer clear of, and everything in between. As always, hit that like, subscribe, the notification icon, do all the things we ask you to do because we appreciate it. If you guys appreciate what we're doing, show some love, show YouTube that you appreciate it. And with that being said, the RB1 overall tier really isn't any surprise. The only surprise, obviously, is the CMC part of it is hopefully he's healthy. And if he's healthy, you start him because he's your stud. Here at Roto Heat, we always say start your studs. Anything crazy about the RB1 overall tier, Kraig, in your mind?
No, I mean, a lot of it is just health contingent stuff, unfortunately, already this year for CMC and Cook. But the other guys, no, I mean, the latter two, it's just interesting how much they have sort of taken away in terms of more than what we expected work for Austin Ekeler. We saw it in the Raider game, how they were giving work to Justin Jackson and Larry Roundtree. Now, was it because of he was banged up potentially? So, again, an injury thing to sort of monitor. Mm-hmm. And Barkley's an interesting one because everyone was – and when I say everyone, because apparently I do that a lot, the community at large, fantasy football, was calling for the demise of Saquon Barkley just because, he wasn't producing this first 2 weeks, but he's still like RB10 or something on the season here. And he's had 2 really good games in a row. So –
and they forget that he had an injury he was coming back from.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to just ignore stuff and create the narrative that you want. But I probably would put Zeke up there too. He's really turned it on. They're sort of committing to the run after that first, big output and not a whole lot of running against Tampa. It was something similar. Like, Zeke is washed up. He's sharing time, while he's had 16, 17, 20 just attempts, not to count the passing work that he's got. So you could probably put a couple other guys up in there potentially, but it's a good tier, the top one.
Well,
and top 6 isn't bad to be either.
Well, and the other thing people need to remember is they've added an extra game this year. That teams are trying to rebalance how they handle the workload for these players, especially guys like running backs who just take an insane amount of hits. I mean, whether it's pass blocking or going out. I mean, it's not the same as a receiver with the amount of action these guys get, and the amount of times they're running into guys that are, 100 pounds heavier than them. So it doesn't surprise me that, a team like Dallas that wants to keep people healthy is going to include Tony Pollard a little more. Plus, Tony Pollard's a really nice back out of the backfield in the passing game and he has a little wiggle in the run game. So it doesn't surprise me, but Zeke is still producing at a good level. And, Barkley's had over 20 points each of the last 2 weeks, depending on your scoring format. So, I mean, it's, these are all very viable pieces. And really anyone in the RB1 overall and the top 6 RB tier could potentially blow up, and it's funny as we move to the top 6 tier, some of the names that are in here, we got a rookie in here who's just basically the entire offense at this point. They've thrown the ball, they run him the ball. Then you have a guy who's bounced all over the league and been everything from a wide receiver to a kick returner to a running back. I mean, this year has definitely been different in some instances, especially for a guy like Cordarrelle Patterson. He was a washout in Minnesota, got play at running back in Chicago, and now Atlanta is basically their starting running back. So as we move to the top 6 tier, are you concerned with any of these guys, or do you feel like for the rest of this season, and especially this week, but the rest of the season, these guys are really safe, kind of high-end RB1 options?
So in the Guillotine League that I'm in, through Roto Heat here, I actually just got Chris Carson on a team that got eliminated because I needed someone because David Montgomery is going to be out for, it looks like a few games here, and the pickings were slim, and you have to start 2. I don't even know if I'm going to start Chris Carson this week. It's more of a down-the-road play. They said he's dealing with a neck injury, and it's a short week. So, he's the one I feel least confident about, which is just a weird dichotomy considering I just paid almost $200 in Fab to get him, but I'm going to need someone else here. And I do think he will be the guy, for most of the season in Seattle, barring anything else bad happening. So for this week, I probably wouldn't have him this high. But the rest of the guys, they're talking about using DeAndre Swift more. Chubb, we see it week in and week out. Taylor, same thing. And then Patterson, he's a guy that I have in probably over half of my leagues that I picked up when he went to Atlanta, just based on the fact that I kind of thought he would be the passing down running back. And he's ended up being much more than that, of course. But it's hard to ignore a guy who, despite what people want to say, he's a gadget player, this or that, in PPR leagues, I think he's the number 3 running back on the year. depending on your score, that may change a little bit, but he's definitely up there.
Yeah.
And you got to take that into account. We're at the point in the season where we're far enough along. It's about a quarter in. You have to adjust how you're looking at some of this stuff. I'm not saying go out and trade for him in every dynasty league, but if you're contending and you can get him a little bit cheaper, or in redraft, certainly he's getting the targets, he's getting rushing, game work. You have to be paying attention to him. Matt Ryan is looking to him at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to throw a hypothetical out. So you mentioned Chris Carson with the neck injury potentially not playing. Do you put whoever the next man up as a guy who has RB1 possibilities, top 6 RB possibilities, RB2 possibilities? It's either Alex Collins, DJ Dallas, Rashad Penny. I mean, some mix of that. Or are you immediately just not looking at Seattle's running back?
There's very few situations where I think you take running back 2, whoever it is on the team, and they're going to replace running back 1 for a period of time, and you just assume that they're going to get that same work, sort of like the thing in Chicago with Damien Williams. Mm-hmm. They're probably going to be using just a little bit more of other running backs too, whether that's Khalil Herbert or someone else there. So I don't think it's a 1-to-1 replacement, and I don't think that's the case in Seattle either. Alex Collins is a very interesting player that has bounced around the league a bit. He had talent, but he just didn't put it together. And I think he has a shot to get close to what Carson was doing, just because that Seattle offense is just run so weird. You'd think, all right, well, this is just going to be better for Russell Wilson, but they just don't do that by and large. They're committed to using that run game. Mm-hmm. I probably would still have Collins like in that RB2 sort of tier if we knew it was him and Carson was out, because I don't trust them to use Collins the same way they had Carson. Collins maybe has that upside, but I need to see that before I'm just, throwing him in there. Oh yeah, he's got top 6 potential. I don't think he does. And, against the Rams, who are sort of mediocre and points given up, man, I'm not doing it right now if that's the case. So
yeah, I absolutely agree. I was throwing the hypothetical out because I know some of our listeners at some point have to deal with that. In any situation, my top running back went down. I do have the backup because I got him on free, on waivers or traded for him or whatever. What do I do now? And, and that's becoming more and more prevalent because it just keeps happening. Top back gets hurt, gets nicked up, misses a week or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, potentially in Montgomery's case. What do I do with the backups? Are they really trustworthy? So as we move on to the RB1 category, this isn't really a surprise. I know folks have been down on CEH and James Robinson and some of these guys, but they're producing well in their offenses and getting the volume, getting the looks, and we continue to see Cleveland support 2 running backs. And I think the league as a whole is starting to get more able because of the high-powered offenses, because of a lot of throwing and checkdowns to running backs. Like running backs, you can have a team support 2 running backs. A lot of these offenses can. Detroit's beginning to get there with Williams and Swift, and Cleveland's there with Hunt and Chubb. Zeke and Pollard. So some of these teams are able to do that. Obviously, we don't want that as a fantasy owner. We want Najee Harris, where he's getting all the running and the catching, but that's just not as normal these days. So as we move to RB1 and even into the top end of the RB2 category, how are you feeling about these guys? Is there somebody here that stands out to you as a name that you're a little more concerned about? Do you have a problem with New England, even though they're going against Houston, or San Francisco with 78 running backs? What's your thoughts on these tiers?
So out of the RB1 group, Robinson has clearly been in that position since Etienne was hurt, that they're going to be using him that way. He's a RB1 on the season. And Kareem Hunt is actually in PPR outscoring Nick Chubb right now. I'm not saying that's going to end that way for the year, but based off of that pass catching work, where they're sitting there, Kareem Hunt has 12 receptions on the year and Chubb has 4. That makes up a decent difference when then you're counting those yards in addition to it. So that's something to sort of consider. But I do like him. Edmonds, he's in that timeshare, but he is getting you, 12 to 18 sort of points a week here consistently, which, that's nice to be able to count on. And CEH, it kind of seems like, I'm cautiously optimistic, they're starting to use him more and get him involved more. He's had at least 13 rushes each game this year, and he's getting some passing game work. So, yeah, I like all those guys up there. The one I'm like least excited about is Darrell Henderson. I do like him a lot, but just calling him an RB1, I'm not there yet. They did go out and get another running back, Sony Michel, for a reason, because they didn't completely feel they could just trust Henderson and then the guys that they had was Funker Jones to be that backup, and we've seen Michel get work. So I think he's captain. I don't think he ends up being an RB1 in the season, even if you don't consider the games that he missed. Going down into the RB2, man, you're rolling the dice here a little bit more. Kenneth Gainwell is probably the running back that I have the most ownership of rostership of out of the rookies this year, just because I wasn't drafting RBs very high in the leagues that I was in position to do so. I really like him, and they're saying all the right things about him, and he's getting a lot of work. I would rather be starting him than Miles Sanders at this point. I think Miles Sanders is probably the better all-around running back, but the way that team is using Gainwell, I like better.
Very true. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and even going back to the Rams situation, when Henderson's available, he's outpointing Michel, and they're really leaning on him. But as the season goes on, it would not surprise me if you told me they started to even out more. Henderson's been banged up. Michel played well when given opportunities. The other guys have been hurt, or I think Xavier Jones is even on IR maybe, or something of the like. So, that's an interesting running back room, and I think it's going to be kind of a week to week. You have to reevaluate it, which is why these tiers are great, which is why you need to hit the notification icon so you can see where we put these guys each week. Moving down into the RB2 category, it's hard to trust any of these guys, even though Fournette looks like the kind of the lead back in Tampa. What does that mean on a weekly basis? Probably RB2 production at best. Gainwell, I could see getting into the RB1 because of the PPR. And then the rest of these guys, Josh Jacobs talent-wise, should be in the, top 6 overall. But the way that the Raiders have been using him, high-end RB2, low-end RB1 might be his ceiling this year each week, the way that they've been using him. And Zack Moss, touchdown dependent, is a little nerve-wracking for an owner. So you really can't trust him much more than an RB2, because what if he doesn't get the touchdowns? What if they go Dawson Knox or Josh Allen? So it's hard to really trust a lot of the guys in the RB2 category. And as we round out the RB2 category, we get the backup in Chicago. We get Michael Carter, who looks like he's finally starting to kind of take the reins with the Jets. What does that really mean? Probably RB2 might be their ceiling. And then once we get down to the flex plays, a lot of question marks and guys that are backups or not getting a ton of looks. Or, in this case, we have both Cincy backs. Mixon's hurt, probably not playing. Samaje Perine is at best a flex because, Chris Evans could be your receiving back and Perine could be your, between the tackles guy. So, as you get to the back end of the RB2 and into the flex category, is there any kind of confidence that you can give our listeners of trusting any of these plays?
So at the back end of the RB2 tier, I do like Murray because it really feels like they're going to be focusing on him. They deactivated Tyson Williams last game, and Jackson's always going to take away work from the running backs, especially when they're on running back 5 and 6 for the year or something like that. I don't know if I'm confident as him at RB2, but I'd love to be able to play Murray as a flex play. He's sort of in that top of the flex, back end of RB2. So if I have to start him as an RB2, I'm not, shaking in fear at night, having bad dreams or something like that. Whereas, if most of these guys in the flex zone, if I'm having to start them, I'm not comfortable because they're either, the second or third option in a timeshare, or you just don't know how much time they're going to get. The only one that I'm, confident in, and it's really weird because if you look at it, he sort of alternates weeks, and this would be an odd week. So start Nahim Heinz, week 1 and week 3 where he had his good weeks of,
he's popping
multiple attempts, more than 1 or 2, and then catches and doing stuff for you. So, and Baltimore, we know they've been in some games where they're putting up points, and if you're having to throw the ball, that's where Heinz sort of makes his money, so to speak. So out of them, if Mixon's healthy, of course, he's up higher. But out of the others that we're considering here, Heinz is the one that I would feel the most comfortable about.
Yeah, and for me, Heinz certainly. Madison against Detroit, if they get up early and if they get up, significantly, 2, possibly 3 scores, which is possible, they could look to lean on Madison more as the game goes on. So this might be a play where you don't see a lot by halftime, but come third, fourth quarter, this guy's running all over the field. So he wouldn't surprise me if he went off. But out of this group, it's hard to trust a lot of these plays because there are so many more questions. Even we had the discussion 2 weeks ago, not this week's show, but the week before, about Shuba Hubbard, stepping in the CMC role, and we thought teens was about as high as he's getting when it comes to fantasy points. So, and I think very similar if he's still significantly playing, CMC with the injury. I just don't see him getting much more than low double-digit points, if that, potentially.
And that's the problem with a lot of these guys. If you're trying to trust a backup, what really feels like a backup, as opposed to someone, and I'm going to throw out a name here, our sleeper group that I like a lot. I like Brandon Bolden because it seems like he actually has a specific role on that team, even if Harris is going to be healthy, where he's going to be a guy that they're trying to, Patriots running backs, don't bet the house on it. But he seems like he's going to be the pass catching back for the team right now. He didn't play a whole lot, but he had 6 targets on the game, which was second behind Jacoby Myers in week 4. If they're going to have to throw the ball, it's probably not going to be Damien Harris. It's probably not going to be Stevenson. And it kind of feels like J.J. Taylor put himself in Belichick's doghouse, which is a terrible place to be. And it also could mean that J.J. Taylor is the pass catching back the rest of the season just because you can't trust him. But if I'm having to pick a guy out of here, it's Bolden because he has a clear sort of role. McNichols, if the wide receivers, the top 2, Jones and Brown, are out for the Titans, he clearly got a lot of work last week, sort of as a receiver almost. So depending on what's going on with the team, he could have a really nice role.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm Brown clearly has a role, but it's not a role that I trust on the Dolphins, with that team just sort of being a mess. And you talk about the mess of the Houston Texans, like it seems like we do in all these tiers. I'm not trusting any of those guys. And honestly, in the redraft leagues where I had any of them, I've cut them and moved on to someone with what appears to be a higher upside just because it's just yucky. You don't want to be starting any one of them. You're never comfortable. And then, that whole offense just does nothing. It's like, why are you wasting a roster spot? And that's what those guys feel like to me at this point. Same thing with Tevin Coleman. He hasn't done anything at all this year. Could he step in and show up and do something for you? Sure. But they're looking to the future more than I think trying to compete. And a Ty Johnson or a Michael Carter to me has a better shot of getting that focus this year based on what they're going to need to do on that team.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is definitely purely emergency plays. If you're in desperate need, some of these guys give you something, but it's not, you can't trust it. And that's the tough thing here. Hopefully you don't get to this point. Hopefully your team, you drafted well, injuries haven't hit you, and you're good to go. But if you do need it, here they are. As always, rotoheat.com if you want the articles to go with supporting tiers or any other content. We do IDP, we do dynasty stuff, we do Devy stuff, we got all sorts of content. So rotoheat.com. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. If you have questions, don't forget, drop below. We will answer your start sit stuff Sunday morning as well if you jump on our Boomer Bust live stream Sunday mornings, and we will talk to you soon.